because as soon as you bank the corner, you've got drug addicts yelling agua, agua to tell the dealers, and they would be gone by the time you got there. So we had all sorts of creative ways that we got into there. At one point, we commandeered a horse trailer, loaded the whole tactical team into a horse trailer, put Abraham, who was one of the task force guys, as the driver wearing a Rasta wig and cranking the reggae music up, and drove into the neighborhood and got right up in front of the drug turf, and the back of that trailer opens up and 30 of us jump out and hit the warrant. But at this point, with the takedown, we didn't care. We were going to take over the whole neighborhood. So we had vehicles at every one of the entrances. We set them up first, and then we had a row of Rick, what was our caravan? Probably 50.
Day parade, Macy's Day Parade size. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the follow-up section of last week's episode. And, I usually don't do 4 episodes, but these guys, we got so many stories. And just before we started this recording, they're like, listen, we got to stay on topic today because we got a bunch of stories to tell you, and that's what we want to do. So I'm not going to waste your time. I do want to welcome you back to the Game of Crimes with Murph in the Morning for this week's episode. Episodes 3 and 4. Thank you for coming back, and thank you for continuing to support us. Now, last week on Tuesday, when we finished up that episode, we were talking to Rick about a shooting he was involved with. And you were with DEA at that time, or Pittsburgh PD, Rick?
Right. That was my first duty position with DEA when actually 2 shootings happened back to back in the first 2 years I was on the job.
Mr. Bullet Magnet, I understand.
The old gypsy curse when I was in the incubator in the hospital. I don't know what happened, but yeah, it was a bit mad moment for the first couple of years of the job.
And by the way, what's your middle name again?
My middle name it's not Trouble. It's Norman. I got the cool mongoose Viking name RIKK in the beginning, and then Rambo at the end. In the middle, I got Norman, so it evens itself out.
You know what? And I just got you mixed up with somebody another guest on the show whose middle name is Murphy, and I was getting ready to say that's just Murphy's Law. All right. So you said that the shooting went well. You were not injured, and it was a clean shooting, no problems, right?
Right. And I can just go ahead and just say both generically for both. Both shootings were really, really good. The first one, the guy pulled a Beretta on me during an arrest. I had a shotgun with deer slugs, and that was the end of that. And then the second shooting was the minute we hit a door on a search warrant, the gunfight was on. I took a .357 Magnum round to the chest, shrapnel in the face. I had an M4 full auto. I returned fire with the M4 full auto, and that was the end of that gunfight as well. But I think in the aftermath, treated very, very well. The first shooting was investigated by Yakima Police Department because it happened within Yakima. The second shooting occurred on an Indian reservation, and that was investigated by the FBI as primary investigation. But they asked the questions that they needed to ask. But DEA, very, very professional. The way that the entire shooting team was treated, unbelievable. And as a young cop, when you're told that you're going to have a psychologist come speak with you, as a young cop, I think a lot of people, speaking for a lot of people I know, it's like, oh, here we go. Because we were good with it. These guys were really bad guys. They were going to kill us. They had weapons. They were going for the gold and whatever. And psychologically, not being macho, never had a problem with the shootings. I didn't lose an hour of sleep. None of it. It seemed like that's what I trained for, and that's what we do for a living. Or whatever. And when they tell you a psychologist is going to come and, giving you a talking to, it's like, oh, you're picturing like Freud, lab coat sitting next to you on like a little dais or whatever they call that you're laying on. And they ask you about your mom and your relationships with, that. And it wasn't anything like that. This psychologist, that's all that they do. They're contracted by DEA, is deal with critical incidents. With those aftermaths of those shootings, they were very, very easy, very straightforward, and it was pretty impressive. You knew you were part of an agency, and the fact that during it was during the first shooting, the shooting happened on a Thursday, and of course they took my shotgun as part of the homicide unit from Yakima had taken my shotgun. Right. But they on Monday that following week, so Thursday the shooting happened, Friday the aftermath of speaking with the SAC and doing all that. On Monday I was going through a door. At like 8 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning with a Colt submachine gun in my hand. That's how much my agency trusted me. And they gave me the option. Would you like to take 4 or 5 days off or a week or whatever? But I mean, psychologically wasn't rattled. And so that next week, day one, business day number 2, actually, going through a door with an SMG in my hand. And that's when you knew you were part of an agency that trusted their people, And it just, as a young agent, that made you feel pretty good about your decisions on what you'd done to, the agency that you'd chosen.
And Chris, let me ask you, does any of that surprise you at all about Rikk?
No, not at all. No, one of my favorite lines came from that second shooting where Rikk was seated on the back of an ambulance getting kind of patched up, and this supervisor came to him and said, how many rounds did you fire? And Rick's response is the greatest line I've ever heard post-shooting was, all of them.
That was the M4, Steve. That was the 30 rounds in the mag and one in the pipe, and yeah.
Well, especially if you've been hit with a 357 round in the chest. Holy cow.
Well, we had just gotten those new lab vests. We were very, very heavy, out there in the Pacific Northwest on hitting drug labs. And we ended up getting the really good vest that had the Nomex in case there was a fire to keep you from melting. And then also, I think these were the ones that first came out that were first capable, at least for the ones that we received, that were capable of taking a 7.62 round like out of an AK-47. So they're very, very heavy. They had a trauma plate in the front that I think was made out of ceramic. So when it was hit hard, it would actually just dissipate that kinetic energy like through, I think, shearing off in places. So you couldn't take like 50 hits, but when it hit, it really dissipated the energy. But still, it was it ruined the vest, brand new vest. I think in the last cast we did, I talked about how long it took to get a vest. You think the DEA would have you a vest like day number 2, and it was a process to get it was a brand new vest. It still had the new car smell, and all of a sudden gone. Yeah.
Well, one other question I want to ask before we move on is how old were you before you stopped peeing in the bed?
A day after that.
I remember growing up in DEA and you get involved in shootings, and we just didn't trust the psychologists they had. There was always that suspicion that, we're going to talk to you in confidence, but then they're going to go tell management what you said and run your career and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And what ridiculous. I mean, just talk about conspiracy theorists. It was crazy.
We know what bolstered my trust in that psychologist right out of the gates is he sat down, and before he even started, he had the whole shooting team together as one. So he didn't separate and divide or whatever, but he explained to us different people psychologically react in different ways when you're involved in a critical incident, shooting, a car crash, a plane crash, a fist fight, whatever. But he described several different things you may experience, like with that time distortion, auditory hallucination, things like that. And also with that buffering, when you may see everything happening, like during that gunfight, the lead up, during the immediate aftermath, you see it, your brain records it, but it buffers it out like a really slow computer because it's concentrating on surviving. It's not the information is going in, but you're more concerned about living through the incident, reacting, whatever, fight and flight and all that. But the fact that he told us these things and they were right smack on the money, it gave him credence. It gave credence to what he was going to, when he was working with us. The fact that what he was telling us, we had already seen those parts. Some of those parts he talked about, psychological components of being in a shooting. And so you knew he was no bullcrap. You knew this guy knew his thing. And right out of the gates, that's one of the first things he told us was what you may or may not experience, because different people are different. But right then, that you knew the guy knew what he was talking about. He wasn't a hack.
Excellent. Later on in my career, when I was an ASAC in Atlanta, one of my groups, in fact, Rob Murphy, was the acting deputy administrator there for DEA here just up until a few weeks ago and is now still the SAC of Atlanta. He took his enforcement group out, and it was a dark 30 morning warrant. I get the call at 5:35. It's never good when you get a call at 5:35 in the morning. And he said, hey, guy shot at us. We had to kill him. I'm on my way. So we got there. There's 4 good guys were shooting. The guy got 3 rounds off from a 45. Luckily, didn't hit anybody, and he got hit 24 times from 4 guys shooting back at him. And this was like within 4 or 5 feet of the bad guy.
Well, Rob was in my class. Rob was actually in my class.
Oh, really?
He was. Yeah.
Wow. You two, I can't imagine you two guys in the same class, man.
He was like the frick to my frack. He was a very serious man.
He still is.
If he laughed, it must have been really funny.
Yep. But so I get out there, and so there's one of the shooters was a former deputy U.S. Marshal who had been involved in several shootings before. And so I pull up, we always got the shooters off site. I go out and meet Rob, and the 3 guys come walking up, and I go, where's the 4th guy? I won't mention their names now. And he pointed over, and the 4th guy's in his car sleeping. I think he was okay with the shooting. Of the other 3 guys, 2 were, concerned, but no outward visible emotions. And then the third guy was visibly shaking. It shook him up pretty good. But when it came time to go into the counselor, I had learned my lesson in Miami where I didn't go to a counselor when my partner got shot. And I didn't suffer PTSD, but I had, and not nightmares, but I had dreams. I relived that shooting from 1989 until I retired from DEA in 2013. Once I retired, I never had any more dreams about it. And we still talk to each other regularly. But after that, I would take my guys to the counselor, because especially guys sleeping. He's like, "Boss, I've been through this before. I don't need counseling. I appreciate you, man. I just need to do me a favor. Just go with me. I'll wait on you. I'll give you a ride back." And he did it out of respect for me, not because he needed counseling.
Right. Well, I know, part of the reason that you do this podcast, this webcast, is to let people know what the guys and gals in law enforcement and other disciplines go through. But also, some of the stories, even though they're funny, they're scary, they're absurd, a lot of them are cautionary tales, especially for any young men and women that are going to be going into this. And I think one of the things we touched on, if we were going to do a short cautionary tale from talking about shootings, is that it is true. From what I've seen, whether you're sitting in a raid van getting ready to go hit a house on a high-risk warrant, or whether you've been involved in a shooting, everybody is different. Now, there are some things that might be commonalities because it's your physiology, like your heart rate, your pupils dilating, things like that when you're involved in it. But you see all up and down the spectrum how people react when they're involved in one of these or whatever, and there's nothing to feel bad about. If you don't feel sad or lose sleep or lose weight or the shortness with your spouse, like they tell you may go through after you're, involved in one, there's nothing wrong with that. Don't ever allow anyone, like if you're involved in one, I would tell people, don't ever allow anyone to put you into like a one lane highway where you have to feel this way. Everybody's different. You may wake up the next morning after one refreshed and as can be, and what have you. But that's the thing, is that everybody's different, and the way they react is different. Even with the training, there's some things you can't train out of people, and that's what the psychologists are there for. And yeah.
Yep. I'm with you 100%, man. All right. Now, when was that second shooting? What year? Do you remember? Second
shooting was in 1999.
Okay. And when did you show up in St. Croix?
I had a couple years to recuperate and then end up on St. Croix in 2002. And the recuperation was officially done at that point, right back into the fray with Chris.
Understood. That's where we're heading now. So, Chris, is there anything you want to talk about before we let Rikk in the picture? Are we coming over there and just disrupting your entire life?
No, I mean, Rikk, it seemed like, we'd cycle through agents every 4 years, DEA agents, the task force guys like myself and the other VIPD guys that were assigned to the task force, they remain the same. And those guys are as much my brothers as Rikk is, they were very solid guys. And there was kind of like, we would go, it seemed like it was a roller coaster. We started off with two really good guys with Jimmy DiCaprio and another one, and then went to some not so great ones, and then we go back to some good ones. And then when Rikk came into the picture, we were firing on all cylinders. We had one guy, we used to joke he was the Chris Farley of federal law enforcement, like big guy with lots of energy, hell of a writer. I mean, he wasn't afraid to work. And so he was running amok and really bringing on, taking on cases and serious cases. And then, the task force guys were all working on stuff, and then Rikk came into the picture, and another agent was in the picture. And so we were, at that point, I feel like the task force was probably at its peak. Like we had, like I said, we were firing on all cylinders. And so we joked because Rikk had come in the office right at the edge of cases that were getting ready to go down. And one of them was what we called Operation Limpia Casa, which was it was an open air drug market in a part of the island that they were selling crack cocaine. They were selling everything. They were cooking crack in 24-inch wash pans. So they were using wash pans to cook crack because they needed so much. And they had the neighborhood was basically, there was good people that lived in the neighborhood, but they were prisoners in their own home. And so you had this drug turf where these guys would sell, and they had lookouts on every street corner. So if law enforcement pulled in the area, these guys would start yelling, the lookouts would start yelling, and you couldn't get close to the area. But we had an informant that a guy had cooperated who started off as one of the dealers there. He cooperated, and he had been making undercover recordings in the area, and the things that he got on camera was incredible. I mean, there was people shooting heroin, there was tons of drug dealers every day, and this thing used to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You could have as many as 30 dealers up there at one time. And
hey, Chris, didn't you have your secret camera and listening equipment and like a boombox that he carried around with him?
He was carrying a boombox radio that transmitted it, and he was quite a character too. This guy, this guy we used to meet at a neutral location to give him the equipment, and I'll never forget. One day we pulled up, and he was in the process. He had a broken piece of mirror in one hand, a pair of pliers in the other hand, and he's looking into his mouth, and before we can say anything, he reached in his mouth for that pair of pliers and pulled out his own tooth, and then took a swig of rum, and he was ready to go. This guy was quite a character, but he was such a good informant that I could use him as the only information in an affidavit for a search warrant. And I could truthfully say he's never provided information that's proved false, and the judge would sign off on it. And so by the time Rikk came in, we had it was close to 200 drug exhibits in that one case, and we were racking up bodies. And I had been working with the federal prosecutors on it, and they asked, what do you want to do here? Do you want to leave a few standing, or do you want scorched earth, is what he said. And I said, we're going for scorched earth. And so we had arrest warrants for like 25 guys on the federal side on a federal drug conspiracy, to include sale of a controlled substance resulting in death, which was a heroin overdose. And then we had another handful of guys that were just users that we had on video shooting heroin, and the local prosecutors agreed to charge them with drug paraphernalia. And so Rikk shows up on island, and I'd been working that case for well over a year. And not to get sidetracked, but one of my favorite stories in that case is we executed a search warrant. We had gotten information from the source that they were actively cooking crack in this apartment in a microwave. And we got a search warrant. We went and hit the house. Everybody went down on the ground. They're all in this kind of living room kitchen area. Everybody goes down on the ground. We clear the house, go back to the living room where we got these guys prone out on the ground and on the floor in handcuffs. And as soon as the last all clear is heard, immediately after you hear ding, and someone walks in the kitchen, opens up the microwave, and there's 2 vials of crack in there that just got done cooking. So, but we were doing catch and release. So we would execute search warrants and get drug, but we'd kick them back out. We never arrested. So they were confused at this point, like why they hadn't been arrested, and we were just catch and release. And I mean, crazy things happened during the course of that case. But fast forward, Rikk comes on island, and in this other case that I had, a trafficking case, America's Most Wanted was coming in to interview me. And this was set in stone. The date was set, but also, as you can imagine, the arrest in Limpia, Casa is going to take a ton of manpower. So that date was set too. So the plan was we're going to execute Limpia, Casa in the morning, and I was going to do the interviews for America's Most Wanted in the afternoon. Well, at the same time, the Chris Farley of law enforcement informs us a case that he's been working now for probably a year. He's got to take that case down too. And what that case involved was the same individual that I talked about that was the dirty canine officer. So he had gotten arrested on a stolen property charge and convicted. So he was a convicted felon, no longer obviously working for the police department, but he was also involved. We had information he was involved in drug trafficking. Mm-hmm. So DEA was able to cooperate him and make him an informant for us. And he was involved in rigging up boats on behalf of drug traffickers. He was a pretty talented guy, actually. And so he cooperated, and he we created this story that we had, I think, Rikk, it was like 200 kilos, right, of cocaine that the informant was telling the traffickers that he was bringing in, and he needed an offload crew. And so this had been he'd been kind of selling the story for quite a while. And Joe comes to us like the same day Rikk arrives on island and says, we got to take down what was called Operation Beach Party on the same day or the following morning after doing Limpia Casa. So the sequence of it is at like, I don't know, we probably briefed at 4 a.m. and we had 100 plus agents that we had brought in island, and we were going to execute the search warrants and arrest warrants in Limpia Casa and try to get all these guys in custody. We had the U.S. Marshals who we totally pissed off because we were dumping on them 20 plus bodies all at the same time for booking. Yep. And we had a helicopter involved. We had to basically take over this neighborhood.
Hey, Chris, I would say as an outsider looking in, being brand new to the island, the day that we took down Limpia Casa, Steve, it looked like the Black Hawk Down, except instead of Rangers and Delta Force, there was like every agency that had letters on their back involved. There were helicopters roaring overhead. It was quite the production. Yeah.
Oh, you gotta love it. You gotta love it.
Yeah. So we took over the neighborhood. There was 4 entrances in, 4 entrances out, and up until this point, anytime we went into that neighborhood, we'd go in heavy, but we'd have to be creative in the way we go in, because as soon as you bank the corner, you've got drug addicts yelling agua agua to tell the dealers, and it would go right up like a block up, and then that one would start yelling agua and go all the way up to the drug turf, and they would be gone by the time you got there. So we had all sorts of creative ways that we got into there. At one point, we commandeered a horse trailer, loaded the whole tactical team into a horse trailer, put Abraham, who was one of the task force guys, as the driver, wearing a Rasta wig and cranking the reggae music up, and drove into the neighborhood and got right up in front of the drug turf, and the back of that trailer opens up and 30 of us jump out and hit the warrant. But at this point, with the takedown, we didn't care. We were going to take over the whole neighborhood. So we had vehicles at every one of the entrances. We set them up first. And then we had a row of, Rick, what was our caravan? Probably, I don't know, maybe
Macy's Day Parade, size. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. And we all had a group of targets, but it was agreed that even if, your team wasn't assigned to that target, if you saw them, you're grabbing them. And the marshals, in the pre-briefing for this thing, they said, if you get 50% in custody by the end of the day, you've done well. And that's what we're kind of anticipating. Well, by noon, we had everybody in custody. And so they were pulling their hair out because they were trying to book all these people at the same time. And it was just, for lack of better words, it was a real cluster in the booking area. And then all the judges were pissed too, because we're dumping that many bodies into court for advisor rights all at the same time. So we created this havoc, and then we're like, all right, good luck, everybody. We got to go. So Rick, it's almost from the time that we finished Limpia Casa, Rick and the other guys, they were beginning for Beach Party. They were preparing for that, and they had to make 200 kilograms of fake cocaine, and then bail it up into, what was it, 10 bales, I think it was. I can't remember, but so originally the case agent had this idea that he was somehow going to package flour and baking soda into kilogram packages, which was very ambitious but not realistic. And we had basically 12 hours to do this, right? Mm-hmm. So when the America's Most Wanted crew arrived on island, I was going to set them up in the conference room for their cameras. And I opened the conference room door, and there's literally like a pile of flour on the conference room table. And there's a bunch of guys, agents standing around. And I hear Joe say something like, the case agent says, I don't think there's 200 kilos of baking soda or flour on this island. How are we going to do this? And so I turn around, and the America's Most Wanted crew is there with like wide eyes, like, what is this? Right. And so I said, I'm going to set you up in my office instead. And I went back and I said, guys, this is never going to work. They had like one attempt, and it looked horrible. It didn't look realistic. So how they ended up doing it was they went out and they bought 2x6 lumber, and they chop sawed 2x6 lumber into the size of kilograms, wrapped them in newspaper first, and then in packaging tape, and then baled it up in burlap bales. And it was pretty convincing. Covered them in glow sticks and everything. And so they did that. So then I began the interviews with America's Most Wanted. Now, keep in mind, it's probably 9, 10 o'clock at night. And these guys, they're finishing up making bales of cocaine, and they get it loaded onto the undercover boat. It was the source's boat that we had tracking transponders on it. We had cameras on it. It was wired up. And then, so Rick and his crew with Diaz and the case agent, they were their
hey, Chris,
point.
I guess for people out there, probably to describe the boat that we're talking about that we use as the undercover boat, it would be your standard go fast, like a Caribbean go fast boat that you'd see, smuggling boat with the outboard, like 2 or 3, 4 outboard motors on it, that kind of boat.
Yeah. So they load up the source's boat, and he goes out to sea. I finish up the interviews with America's Most Wanted, and I did the interview with a pair of cargo shorts on, but I was wearing a dress shirt and a jacket on top because I never stood up, so then no one would ever know.
Did you have your flip-flops on?
I may very well, or I may have been barefoot. And then I quickly switch into tactical clothes, meet Rick out in the parking lot, and Rick's driving this, what was that thing, that big pickup truck he used to drive?
It was the only Chevy 2500 long bed on the entire island of St. Croix. gold in color.
Yeah. Oh, you don't stick out.
No, not at all. No.
So Rick and Diaz, they're on the takedown team. I'm on the surveillance team with Abraham. So we jump in the bed of the truck with Rick and Diaz, and they bring us out to this remote part of the island where the offload beach is going to be. And we're staged up on a hillside overlooking the beach where the source is going to come ashore, and it's got a dirt road that leads down to that beach. Rick and his team, they stage up at the top of the dirt road. And all of a sudden we start seeing vehicles arrive. It's the crew that's going to try to offload this 200 kilograms of cocaine. It's the targets. We're providing that information to Rick and his team. And the plan is once half the bales are off, then we're to give the go signal.
You guys had night vision cameras and everything else?
We had night vision, and we had forward-looking infrared. So, yeah, we had forward-looking infrared and night vision. And then we had an infrared emitter, too, that was mounted to this big spotlight, which we broke when we jumped out of the bed of that pickup truck. We broke it. We had a makeshift, repair it so we could use it. And that was just basically for illuminating the targets with infrared. And so we start unloading, they start unloading, they get half of it off. And we've got good radio comm with these guys, with the takedown team, but when we finally go to give the go signal, there's no response. And we're like, we've lost comm with them. And so I'll let Rick take it from there. What was transpiring by him.
So we're staged in the jungle, next to where this little dirt road, sand road that goes down to this remote beach is. And it was my partner Diaz, that we talked about during one of the other episodes. He was my partner on that one case we did. And he's former 82nd Airborne, so he's also former military. So you have some capable people with you. And so we're staged off that road, and it's dark as it's going to get back in that jungle. And we're only feet away from the road. Well, one of the offload crew, that was one of the people we were going to arrest, and this guy was also military as well. I think he was a National Guard guy at the time. But nevertheless, he comes back up to act as a lookout on that road in the dark. And so he comes up, and it's not so dark that we can't see his outline and whatever, but it's dark. He comes up there and stands there right as the offload of the boat is coming up. And so we've got to go. We're hearing Chris over our headphones saying, it's time. And so this guy's standing there, and he had something in his hand as he's standing there washing off the road. And so we have to go. So I'm maybe, I don't know, I was maybe 5 feet away from this guy in that ditch right next to him. He has no idea that I'm there. And on that night, I had a Colt submachine gun. And so I flipped it to full auto, and so you could hear that click, and he heard the click. And I said very simply, I just said very, very quietly, because I don't know how my voice is going to carry down that road. I said, "Federal agent, get on the ground or die." And this guy, he goes right to his knees, and he lays down on the ground, and he's got his hands like this, but he still has whatever's in his hand in his hand. And I'm on him with the sub gun, and I said to Angel, right next to me, I said, he has something in it, right? Quiet. He has something in his right hand. And I'm finger on trigger. I don't know what this is. He has in his hand. And this guy hears that too. You can't see me off camera. He takes his hand, and as far as he could possibly move his hand away from his body, shoves it on the ground so it's like as far away from his get, and then goes back to laying spread eagle with that, it ended up being a handheld radio. But he shoves that as far away from his body as he can without being asked, and then just lays there waiting for the cuffs. And so we had one of the guys at the rear of the stack, keep him. And then that's when we went barnstorming down that road and took down the boat.
Yeah. Sounds like whoever that guy was up there that you took into custody was aware of what could potentially happen to him because of Chris and company's previous exploits there.
Yeah, Haida had a pretty good rep down there. Haida had a really, really good rep. But that wasn't the end of that wasn't the end of Beach Party. Chris, you can tell the part about somebody going AWOL on that boat, going man overboard.
Yeah, so when they made it down the beach, the plan was that when they gave the command, please get down, or whatever the takedown was, we would throw on spotlights, right? So we would go from night vision and FLIR to visible light, right? So that I hear that command, and we faces go away from the viewfinders, and we flip on the visible light, and we see kind of this calamity happening on the beach. Well, we didn't know it right away, but there was one guy missing. So they get them all prone down on the ground, and there's one guy missing. And so we pull the source aside, and the source says, yeah, he was here. He's I don't know where he went. So we had cameras on the boat. And so we roll back the footage, and the guy was on the boat pulling the bales and handing bales when the takedown team arrived. Well, he didn't waste any time. He just was like this running jump flies over the outboard motors and everything off the back of the boat and begins swimming away. And he actually got away for a good, I don't know, it was probably 6 hours. And then we got him in the morning and got him into custody. And that was, Beach Party was done at that point, right? So
they say scared feet run fast, or whatever that old saying is, scared feet run fast. The undercover cameras on that boat, for what they were back in 2003 or 2002, they were actually really good. I mean, this guy, as soon as the yelling started and the lights came on, this guy was, like Chris said, he was out the boat, jumping off over the outboards and off the back. I mean, it was really good it looked really good on film, like maybe like a Michael Bay movie or something. It's pretty funny. Good reflexes.
It happened right at the time we were going. Our eyes were coming out of the Lin finder, so we didn't actually see it happen. It wasn't until we rolled back the footage, was a good 15, 20 minutes later, that we realized what happened. But by that time, he had already swam away from where the action was, hit the beach, and took off running, I guess. But we got him like 6 hours later, and so now we're I don't know how many days into this thing, where we haven't slept, and we're kind of mopping up the mess of all this.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing really quickly. So the final part, we're still on the beach before we took off and took them all to the Hooskow and whatever, but it was immediately after the arrest. I mean, within probably a minute after the arrest, these guys are all sitting forlorn on a remote beach on St. Croix in the sand. They'd just gotten thrown down and whatever, probably had sand in their nethers. And the one guy looks at the other guy, and you knew they'd been offloading boats multiple times before, because he looks at the other guy. One bad guy looks at the other bad guy, and he goes, just as like it's like if you're ordering lunch, he looks at the guy and he goes, and once again the boat comes and we get paid. So you knew they'd been probably stiffed before or shorted on offloads, but that left no doubt that you had the right guys when they say that contemporaneously, or whatever that college word is.
Yeah, and the one guy had said, I felt like the bales didn't feel right. He's like, he had enough experience with bales of cocaine where, in our quickness to try to build these things, they weren't perfect for sure. Mm-hmm. So, but, and I think if you kind of threw one down on a deck, it didn't make the same sound as it would if it was actual cocaine. So, but it was in the middle of the night where you had very little light to work with, and you're trying to do something quickly. It passed. They believed it was cocaine enough that they were unloading it and thought they were going to have a payday. So
those are great, incriminating statements to hear them say that can be used against them later.
Yeah, for sure.
Funny.
Right. It is funny.
Yeah.
So now you're bringing more people into the marshals in the court system, right?
So originally they had everybody for Limpia Casa had their initial appearance, right? And then there was detention on those guys that was set for the following day. And we're putting more people into the system as a result of this other thing. And, none of us have slept now for a good 24 hour or 48 hours, in the preparation for all this. And keep in mind, this is Rick's second day on island and all hell is breaking loose. So I was like, we've had conversations about that before. I was like, did you get briefed on what you'd be heading into? And he's like, no. It was like the answer was absolutely no. I don't think anybody really understood, what was going on and the lengths that we would go through and like bushwork was like very common there. You couldn't do like a traditional surveillance. We were always in full ghillie suits, camped out in the bushes somewhere. That was the only way to do it. 'Cause you would, if you parked a car in the street that wasn't recognized, you'd be burnt within a couple of minutes. So, so very unconventional tactics that we were using, and so we were bringing these guys to the jail after their initial appearance. We had dropped them off, and we were heading back, and it was Rick, myself, and Diaz, and another task force guy. No, it was Rick, Diaz, and myself in a van. And it's a blacked out van. They were burnt. They were very well known. We got those in '96 when some of the first vehicles we got in Haida, but they were fine for like transporting prisoners and stuff like that. And we were coming up over the top of this hill, and we reach a roadblock and had this encounter with an officer that we had previously investigated. And I won't get into full details about that, but it almost ended very, very poorly for him. So, we were still up against this, this element of, not knowing who we could trust. Some people we knew we couldn't trust, but we really didn't know like who was on our side or who wasn't. So I won't get into too much detail about that, but, it's probably a good time that we talk about, like, at this point, Rick, obviously he becomes our brother like almost instantly, and he's adopted into the family that's DEA there at the time, the DEA task force at the time. And, not long after this event, we were just like, there were times that we didn't see our homes during daylight. We were working so much. It was like we were constantly working. And I remember this day that Rick, we were walking out to the parking lot, and it was weekend, and we finally had some days off, and Rick goes, "You guys want to go diving this weekend?" And I said, "I'll go," and so there's an area called Cane Bay, which is, you swim off a shore, and it's probably a few hundred yards off a shore. There's a coral reef, and then it drops down, I don't know how far that drops down, Rick.
It's a couple, yeah. We went out to I think, what happened is you go out 120 feet down is what recreational scuba, before you have to start using different gases to kind of mitigate the pressure and nitrogen and all that. But what happens is you swim down through coral that goes like at an angle, a really slight angle, but you're swimming through like almost like corridors of coral. It's beautiful down through. And then you get to a place, and it's like looking off the Grand Canyon. When it
just goes to blackness.
Yeah. So you're about 75, 100 yards offshore. You're at about 100, 110 feet. And then it just drops off, and the water's crystal clear. You can see hundreds of yards down, and it just goes into dark black blue. And I think it's a continental shelf, and it goes down a couple miles.
And there's a dive shop that is across the street that we could rent all our gear from. And that was the most convenient, because you literally walk across the street and get in the water and swim out to that. And so we rented from there, and the dive shop is kind of run by these, kind of reminded me of my days in Caribbean Sea Adventures, where you had, people that were just not really, younger generation. They were looking for, get away for a year or so and spend some time in the Virgin Islands, and a lot of hippie looking chicks worked out of there. And so we rent our gear and go across the street, and we're diving. And of course, Rick, being paranoid and being Rambo, he's got a 45 he kept in a dry bag in your BC, right? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, I had my Glock 21 in a dry bag inside my BC. Yeah, my buoyancy control device. Yeah.
just in case when he gets out of the water.
Because you never know. You never know who's going to be waiting for you when you come up.
Yeah. But then to top it off, he also had, and I'll let you explain, the power head for your spear gun as well. So
yeah. So when I first got to St. Croix, I had regular fishing gear, like fishing tackle, fishing pole, and Diaz, our mutual friend, he invited me like the first week I was there, invited me to go fishing. I'm like, we're gonna go fishing, awesome. So I show up at the dock and I have my Bing Crosby, I got a Bing Crosby hat on and my fishing bag and my fishing gear, and these guys are all look like Navy SEAL DevGru 6. They have all their BCs and dive knives, and they spearfish down there.
Gotcha.
They use spear guns. So on that trip, I got to fly overhead cover and just watch how they did it. So I just had my snorkel and my mask, and I'd swim overhead. They're about 30 feet down, and they're doing their thing. So I had to gear up and get my gear to do it. So I ended up buying an open water spear gun, pretty big spear gun, 6 foot long open water spear gun. And just because you could, I guess, because sharks can be a problem, especially when you have blood in the water when you're spearfishing. I bought this thing. It was by a company. They're still around called BECO, B-E-C-O. It was a 44 Magnum power head. Now, they make them for commercial divers all the way to 50 caliber Browning, like M2 Mod Deuce 50 caliber. But a 44 Magnum is one that I bought. But what it is, it's a device that fits over your spear. And so I kept it like in a little pouch here on my BC. It's all by itself. You take your 44 Magnum regular bullets. You gloss over them with fingernail polish to seal them up. That way you can go to depth and they don't get water into the powder, into the primer. So, but that just stays there. But that way, if you run into a shark, all you have to do is you take that out of the pouch, and it has almost like a clamping thing where you just stick it onto your spear, it clips on, and now you can do one of two things if you're getting a shark coming in on you getting really aggressive. You can either jam it into the shark, holding the spear gun, and it'll go off, or you can shoot it. And when that spear comes out and hits, I think it has to be 35 or 40 pounds to make it go off, like 30, 35 pounds, enough resistance to make it go. But that's what you have in case you have to mitigate a shark encounter. And so that's what we had, what Chris is talking about there. It's called a power head. Yeah.
But you didn't run into a shark, though, did you?
So, yeah, we were almost finished with a dive. We spot 2 sharks, and they were quite a bit deeper than us. And I turned to Rick, and he's putting that damn thing on, and I was like, all right, well, at least we're good if it's go time. And I remember Rick saying that we saw the shark swimming away, and Rick does a hand signal, basically.
I got to stop you 1 second, Steve. So what Chris does is they're coming up to us really slow, running a pattern, right? And unbeknownst to us, but I didn't know about this until later on, Chris, but there was a diver killed in the same place we were by an oceanic whitetip, like years before. They're doing seismic testing for NOAA along that that deep water ridge right there, putting devices in, and an oceanic whitetip, which I think is responsible for a lot of the guys from the Indianapolis that were killed during World War II, the ship that went down delivering the atomic bomb. Oceanic whitetips are very, very dangerous. But nevertheless, there was a guy that had been eaten right there. We didn't know about it, but it happened like maybe 8 years before. But these sharks came from the deep, and they were running a pattern on us, coming up really slow. They weren't coming out aggressive. They were like
Rick's defending his actions right now is what he's doing.
I really am. I'm justifying everything that happened. But where Chris is funny is so we're both aware they're coming, right? Well, the one shark turns in and starts coming and I'm kind of like this equilibrium, hanging, watching what's going to happen next. And I got the spear gun in front of me, and the shark turns and starts to come almost directly slowly. It's not flying in at me, but it's really slow. And I can hear underwater, Chris, it's like, let's get it on. I can hear Chris underwater go, I can hear that sound underwater. And that shark does this. And I think it was the sound. The shark does this thing. It's like, I can't know if you can see me on the camera, but it does this thing if you'd get mildly shocked. It's like this shuddering. The whole shark does this shuddering thing, and then it just slowly turns away, and both sharks go back down into the deep, and you don't see them again. And that was that. But when Chris made that, we're going to get it on now, or whatever, that shark actually reacted to it like a thing, and then they left. But anyway, there you go. Yeah.
At about that same time, we were low on air. I think I might even run out, and so we surfaced and started, ditched our regulators and started snorkeling back in, and I got a little bit ahead.
I had to do that deco stop, that decompression stop
we start swimming back in, and I get a little bit ahead of Rick, not far, maybe 15, 20 feet, and I'm swimming, minding my own business, and all of a sudden I hear this boom under the water, right? And I was like, oh, Jesus, I know exactly what that is, right? And so I turn around and I swim back to Rikk, and I ditch the snorkel out of my mouth, and I go, he's got his face in the water, and he's just kind of treading water there and looking down. And I said, what happened? And he pops his head up for a second, and he gives me this blank stare, and he points down. So I look down, I don't see anything. Like I was expecting that the shark had, when I looked down, I actually thought he was going to be missing a limb. Like these sharks had circled back, but I don't see anything. I guess I was looking over limbs, and I go, I don't see anything. And he says, he goes, look. And I look down again, and then this is when I spot it. We're probably in, I don't know, maybe 10 feet of water, 50, not very deep. Yeah. And I see this green moray eel, and it's big, and it's on the bottom, and it's got a very large hole in its head. And, I was like, dude, why'd you shoot that? And so he takes the snorkel out of his mouth. He goes, listen, man, that thing was coming at me with his mouth wide open. He says, I hit it once with the spear gun, and he came right back at me, so I let him have it. And he goes, and then immediately Rikk jumps into, can you eat these things? And I'm like, if you can, I've never heard of it, right? And so he says, well, I don't want to leave it out here and find out I could eat it, so help me load it into the net bag. And immediately I realized this thing's never going to fit because it's like 5 feet long. And so we try to load this carcass into the net bag, and the tail, its tail was dangling out of it, right? So Rikk pulls this thing back to shore. As soon as he hits the shore, the kids start gathering, and they're poking it with sticks and going, wow, man, what happened there? Where'd you get him? And so Rikk immediately jumps into his, Wild Kingdom story. And I told Rikk, I'm going to go return my gear. I'll come back. And so I walk across the street and walk into the dive shop, and I put my gear up on the counter, and this, 20-some-year-old kid goes, hey, how was the dive, man? And I was like, it was good. I said, we saw some sharks. And he's like, oh, cool, man. That's way cool, man. And then all of a sudden, this girl comes sailing in the front door of the dive shop, and she goes, some soldier shot Earl. And I was like, wait, this can't be a coincidence. And so I started looking around the dive shop, and I start seeing pictures everywhere. Like, I don't know how we missed them before when we went in and rented our gear, but there's pictures everywhere of divers feeding this green moray eel. And I'm thinking, that guy looks familiar. And everybody in the dive shop is freaking out. They're all going and standing in the doorway, looking down to the beach at Rikk down there doing his Wild Kingdom impersonations. And they're like, the one girl's in tears. She's really upset. And they're like, why would he do that? And everybody's freaking out. And then I noticed there's this 4x8 sheet of plywood that they've painted a map on. And on the map is Earl the green moray eel. Go here to feed him. And I'm like, yep, that's exactly where he got shot. And so I get my dive card back, run down to the beach, and go, Rikk, give me your gear. I'll return it for you. And Rick's like, why? And I tell him the story, and he starts laughing. He goes, they were feeding him, huh? No wonder he came at me with his mouth open. And we're like, yeah. So basically what Rikk has done here, to kind of recap, is the same as walking into Disney World and shooting Mickey Mouse in the head. Is he's murdered the tourist attraction in that area. And so Rikk says, I'll let Rikk finish this part of the story.
Okay, first of all, while we're on self-justification, the topic of self-justification, unbeknownst to us that day, but beknown to us about a week later from a dive instructor in St. Croix over in Christiansted proper, this same eel, because it's kind of like bears. You feed bears and it's a problem, right? Because now they keep coming back, and they get aggressive if you don't feed them.
Yep.
So this was, I think, within a month and a half before our little incident with Earl, there had been another dive group that didn't feed that eel, that had dove in the same place. And it was a younger gal, 12, 14-year-old gal, but Earl came at her, lashed onto her, got her, I think, in the ear and the side of the face here. And, when eels get into you, they can't get back out because their teeth curve backwards to keep the fish. So that way a fish can't escape. So what they do is they twirl kind of like an alligator or a crocodile when they do that death roll. Well, they do that to be able to either rip or get. what really messed the girl up pretty good, they had to take her over to Puerto Rico, over to San Juan, to a hospital. I think they life flighted her. It ripped her up that good and whatever. I mean, maybe it was another eel, but there weren't many eels that big. I mean, this thing was a massive, moray and whatever. Yeah. But I'm pretty sure that was Earl, and he got what was coming to him. I'm going to stick with that story. I think Earl deserved every bit of that 240 grain Jacket Hollow point that he got. But yeah, so I go into the dive shop. I mean, I like everybody, right? I walk into the dive shop, and I didn't realize the magnitude of what was going on inside that place. But I walk in smiling, and I'm like, "Hey guys," I said, "Did Chris tell you about the sharks out there?" And they're all just looking at me with this dead look on their face, like they're just looking at me like whatever. Yeah. And the owner, who was, I think he might have been a chronic inebriate from what I heard. But anyway, this guy, he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Why didn't you shoot them too?" Or something. I'm like, uh-oh. So I kind of already realized now that I'm not going to be, I may not be Mr. Popularity, but I'm thinking, reason prevails. I'm going to tell him what happened, because what Chris said was right. This thing, when he came out, I looked up from I was looking at my dive computer as we're going along to check something out. When I looked up, all I had was that big mouth with all the teeth right in front of my face.
Oh.
And, normally I knew enough about moray eels, even being new on the island, having just read about them as a kid and whatever, that they like to stick to rocks. They like outcroppings. They don't like being in the open. That's not their forte, is being out in the open ocean, right? Didn't make sense in my head why. And so I kicked backwards to get my face away from it. So now I'm swimming backwards with that eel. He's over my body, right? But he's looking at my face. I'm looking at him swimming backwards. And I had my spear gun reeled up underneath my arm, right? So it's not out to full extension. And it's pretty hefty with that. I saw the power head on that thing. So, and I'm swatting him. I swatted him really hard in the head with that thing to try to turn him. As I did that, I turned to swim the other direction, like sideways, like 90-degree angle. And he followed me after getting hit in the head with that thing. And that's when I made a decision to press the trigger on him and whatever. But something can reasonably prevail in the dive shop. I'll tell them what happened. They'll get it, because, preservation of life and all that. I started to tell them, and you could tell I didn't get even 1.5 sentences in, and you could tell they were listening. They tuned out. They weren't listening. And so, yeah. Chris, do you remember what I said to him? I knew it was pearls before swine, or pearls before swine at that part. There's no use. There's no reasoning with these people, kind of thing.
As you're talking, I Googled Earl the eel in St. Croix, and he popped up.
Still alive. The legend still lives. Yep.
Oh my gosh.
Chris, do you remember what I said to those people in the shop?
It was something like, "You're the reason that bears get shot in state parks." Something to that effect. Like, you're the reason that you're the reason that bears get shot in state parks. You go in there and you feed them and act like they're domestic animals, and then you're surprised when they attack somebody and they have to euthanize them. Something to that effect. So,
sounds dead on.
Well, then, so that story with Earl the eel lived. I mean, it still lives on today. I mean, but we messed with Rick up until the time, long after the time he left St. Croix. I mean, that became a running joke in the task force for a long time.
They prank called me about a day after. They somebody called me pretending they were a Department of Natural Resources law enforcement officer. If they're going to pursue criminal charges on the murder of Earl.
What did you eat Earl?
The end of the story of that, we actually took him and we called our friend Angel, whose father was a local fisherman, and his dad said, "Do not eat Earl." So what happens is the fish that those eel eat, they eat like an algae off the reef, but that algae is toxic in those fish. It doesn't kill the fish, but it builds up in their flesh, and then of course once it's concentrated there, then the eel eats it. Now it gets it in there, and so if you were to eat that eel, chances are you could get this thing, I think, called Cigatella. Chris, does that sound right? But it can really mess you up, be badly for months. It can put you into like anaphylactic shock. It can cause all kind of like physiological problems. So Earl end up not getting consumed. Yeah. Well,
and I'm reading here that you actually can eat them, but you got to cook the crap out of them first because it takes care of the toxin you're talking about.
Yeah, I know that what those local fishermen would do, especially with barracuda, because barracuda would eat those same fish that the eel ate, is they would actually taste the liver. And they knew, the local fishermen, they knew what that liver of that fish tasted like. And if it had a certain, and they told me it was like a spicy taste to the liver, that meant do not eat that barracuda because it's going to give you those problems. And if the liver tastes the other way, then you're good to go. But
jeez, I wouldn't want to be the one to taste the liver.
Yeah. I think our friend Angel actually had a bad barracuda one time, and he was talking about. He said for like a month or two, when he'd drink water, it felt like it would shock him through his teeth, like he's getting shocked through his teeth. But I think that the symptoms of that ciguatela that you'd get from those fish, it would affect different people differently, depending on whatever. Yeah.
I'm looking here. It's ciguatera poisoning. Ugh. All right, back to narcotics trafficking here. That's a whole lot safer than going after a freaking eel.
Yeah. Well, the one case with Beach Party and that informant led to another informant who was working for us and investigating on a case over in St. Thomas, and the case agent was the same case agent that was working Beach Party. That kind of like Beach Party kind of parlayed into this other case. And in the interim, Rikk and Diaz started investigating a group of guys that were mostly known as like enforcers. They were a violent gang that would take almost like contract work for other traffickers. And they were connected to a guy who was, he was involved with the Cali cartel on the north coast of Colombia. That's where he was getting his cocaine from. And so we had tracking orders for his boats, but he lived in like a walled compound. It's the best way I can describe it. It was once a boat was being kept in that yard, there was no way to get to it. We would get burned if we ever tried to go over that wall, but we got lucky, and one of his boats had been, he obtained the boat, but didn't yet have a trailer for it. And according to the source, as soon as he got a trailer, he was going to keep it with the rest of his fleet, if you will, in his compound. But for the time being, it was kept on a mooring about a mile off ashore in Frederickstead. And we immediately got a tracking transponder order for it. And the plan was made to get this transponder in. And what we did is we had a rigid inflatable that we carried down to a remote beach at like maybe 2-3 o'clock in the morning. And it was Diaz and Rambo they were the gun guys. I was the tech guy. I was installing the transponder. And then the case agent, he was the captain of the boat. So we carried the rigid down there, put it in the water. And I joke with Rick, because Rikk and Diaz, this group was a very violent gang. They had a lot of homicides under their belt, including the kidnapping, torture, and murder of a Virgin Islands police officer. Oh, and so they had quite a reputation for murder. And they're now connected to this drug trafficker, so they had assets available to them. And I remember one of the stories is they kind of evolved in how they would discard bodies. In the beginning, they used to bury them on the beach because it was soft sand. It was easy to get rid of bodies. About the same time Rikk and Diaz started their investigation on these guys, they had a body that they buried on the beach. It was a tourist beach, and tourists came in the morning, laid their towels, went swimming. When they came out of the water, rigor mortis had kicked in, and an arm of the body popped out of the sand in between two beach towels. Oh. And so once that had happened and bodies started getting discovered, they started dismembering bodies and dumping them out at sea. Mm-hmm. And so this boat was considered a high value target. If we could get a transponder on it, we would stand a good chance of getting a load off of this guy. So, but because of the violent nature of the group, like we were all armed to the hill, but no one more than Rikk and Diaz. And they had tactical float vests on, but it wouldn't have mattered. They had so much ammunition and firearms on them that had they fallen overboard, they'd have gone straight to the bottom, and we'd never gotten them back. So
while we're laughing, it's not funny, but it's true.
Well, and so we went offshore, and we went about 2 miles out so we could come back in behind that boat and get me on board. So they dropped me off on board, and then they went back out to sea, and I had radio comm with them. Plus we had units on the beach watching what was going on the beach to make sure no one was coming. And at that time we had transponders that I probably can't say where they came from, but they were not civilian law enforcement transponders. We'll just put it that way. But they were special equipment from one of those special agencies. Let's say it that way. And they were a remarkable piece of engineering. So I get this installed on the boat, and And then I call for the pickup. These guys come pick me back up. We go back to the same beach that we launched from, and we're carrying that rigid inflatable back up on shore. Now, at this point in my career, I had already arrested 14 Virgin Islands police officers in my career by that point.
Wow.
And so,
wow.
and we, like I said, this isn't in any way an indictment of all the men and women of the Virgin Islands Police Department, because there are some very good ones and very honest ones, but there was also a lot that we just didn't know if they were straight or dirty. I mean, we had been burnt a bunch of times where we thought someone was good and find out they weren't. And so we're carrying that rigid inflatable up the beach, and all of a sudden a VIPD marked unit pulls up and throws on their side lights on us, and now we're lit up at 4:00 in the morning on this beach, armed to the teeth, carrying a rigid inflatable up the beach. And I remember the case agent, or it was maybe Rick or one of the other agents, says, "Did we just get burnt?" And I go, "Aside from the people carrying this boat, I don't vouch for anybody." And I remember I ran up to the car real quick and I go, "Hey, we're on something." And the lights went off and they drove away. And to this day, we don't even know if that was compromised or not, or someone said we were on an operation. I have no idea. So,
well, those guys had a story to tell for the rest of their lives. We were out on patrol when all of a sudden, dang.
Yeah. So we got the transponder on, which was great. And then at the same time, the Chris Farley of law enforcement was actively working this case over in St. Thomas. And, he was up on wires. We had transponders on vehicles. And one of the vehicle, the main vehicle this guy drove, something went wrong with the transponder, and there was also a wire in that vehicle. And so we had to recover that equipment. And so the attempt was to do it at 0 dark 30 operation, jump the fence into his yard, change the equipment out. But he had this dog. His name was Fluffy. And Fluffy was about this big, but Fluffy had a big mouth. And so I went over the fence, and Fluffy was going on like a psycho.
And just to put into context about Fluffy, so that was the dog's real name. His real name was Fluffy. But to put into context how funny that dog had that wimpy name, the guy who owned him, this bad guy and whatever, when we ultimately arrested him and I'm questioning him, I asked him, he was a transporter. He had a lot of vessels that would go back and forth to Central and South America, coming back and forth and all that. I asked him point blank, and he answered me as honestly as you're going to get. I said, if you were approached by somebody from down south that you knew was not from down south, and I said, I'll be point blank with you. This is like post 9/11, someone of Middle Eastern descent, and they wanted you to bring a package back up to the Eastern Seaboard that you knew was not drugs, it was not anything else other than that. It was possibly, unless it's put the way it is, a weapon of mass destruction, biological, nuclear, chemical. What would you do? And this guy, to put in context of Fluffy, that the dog had that name, this guy looks me in the face and he says, "Me son, it's not me job to know what's in the package. It's me job to get the package from point A to point B." Meaning he didn't care if it was a WMD or if it was dope. If he was paid to get the package there, he was going to get the package there. And he wasn't flamboyant about it or being boastful. He was very scared because when we arrested that guy, it was pretty good circumstances when we arrested him. But anyway, that's Fluffy's owner, to put it into context of how that dog got that name from that guy.
Well, anyway, no, you're good. And to add to that, he wasn't just involved in transporting cocaine. He was human trafficking too. And why the case agent was so adamant about getting this guy locked up is he had been involved in a smuggling venture that went bad, and it was one or two people died during that smuggling venture. So he was not a good guy. He was definitely a bad guy, but he was also very dangerous, and he was connected, at least loosely, to the same group that Rick and Angel were investigating, that were involved in multiple homicides and everything else. So we really wanted to get this guy, but the transponder and wire that went bad in the car, we had to fix this thing. And so we were kicking around ideas like, how do we eliminate Fluffy? And, Diaz, being the lunatic that he is, he just basically wanted to go there with a burlap bag and snatch Fluffy up, throw him in the bag, and take him someplace. And I was like, I don't know if that's going to work. We'd be chasing Fluffy all over the yard. So it was Rick and I were over at an undercover apartment or hotel.
Let's just go ahead and tell the truth, Chris. It was a Ritz-Carlton hotel.
It was a brand new Ritz-Carlton too.
Wow.
But the reason we got
4-room suite at the Ritz-Carlton.
Yeah. But the reason we got it is it directly overlooked. It was across the valley from the target's house. So from that Ritz-Carlton room, the suite, we could see directly to the target's house. And so we were doing surveillance from it, and it was like the perfect location. But it was brand new. Like, I think we were the first tenants in this hotel. They'd just gotten done building it.
It was way above our pay grades. Way above our pay grade, Steve. Way above our pay grade.
Yeah. So we're camped out in this hotel, and we're telling the case agent, we got to do something to get rid of Fluffy here. And so he goes, all right, I got something. I'll send it over. Right. Now we had been tranquilizing dogs in these covert operations for a while, and usually we would take hot dogs and inject them with phenobarbital and feed them to the dog, and the dog would eat them and go to sleep. And so I figured that's what I was getting is a vial of phenobarbital. In fact, when I left the task force, I still had vials of phenobarbital in my desk drawer with a bunch of syringes, right? Because this happened regularly. This wasn't like an anomaly. We used to do this a lot. And so so this package comes, and Rick goes and picks it up, and he's like, dude, you got to see this thing. And it's this long box, right? We open it up, and it's a rifle. It's a tranquilizer rifle, right? And we pull out the dart for this thing. And this thing's like 6 inches long. The syringe part of it has got a barb on the end of it. It's like for darting elephants. This is serious business.
It was made for jobbing rhinos, like jobbing rhinos,
yeah. Yeah, and I was like, I looked at Rick and I go, I don't have the heart to shoot Fluffy with this. And Rick goes, I don't give it to me. Let's go. And I'm like, no, like, we'll kill the dog. 100% we're going to kill the dog. And so I said, dude, I'm telling you, that thing's way too powerful. And Rick goes, all right, let's test it before we do it. Right. So Rick lines up this cardboard box that it came in against the wall of Ritz-Carlton and takes 10 steps back, gives a countdown to 1, 2, 3, fires the thing, and it blows through the box and through the drywall and sticks into a refrigerator on the opposite side in the kitchen, right? And I'm like, absolutely not. So Fluffy didn't end up getting murdered that night. We ended up going about it a different way. We actually were able to borrow the truck and get this thing replaced, or get the equipment replaced. But so that case is going on at the same time. Rick and Diaz are working this case on this violent organization, and there comes a time that they start executing some search warrants because, like, other investigative methods were just not working, and they execute a search warrant and they get a large sum of money. And then the investigation is quickly no longer overt. It's covert. It's become very overt, overnight. And, we knew there were police officers tied to that organization that were involved with the organization, but we also knew that this group was extremely violent, very dangerous. And so, everybody's kind of like on high alert, and these two cases are running, back to back. Well, eventually we get to the point where we've got to take down the group over in St. Thomas. And so we did an undercover buy walk where we bought 1 kilo of cocaine from the group, but there was wire conversations. There was a lot of evidence that implicated the lead target and a bunch of others. So now it's another one of these situations where we're going to have another big takedown, this one being over in St. Thomas. And so the plan is to, first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab up the lead target, Fluffy's owner. And so we kicked it back. At the time the prosecutor assigned to the case was a young woman by the name of Trish Salzback, who since passed away. And she was wonderful. She was not like one of these prosecutors who would try to tell you how to do their jobs. Her sole job was to tell you if what you were proposing was legal and she could defend it. And so we pitched this idea to her that we're going to grab the lead target in the middle of the night and throw him on a go-fast boat and bring him back to St. Croix in hopes that he will cooperate. And the reason that we're going to do this is this way is because we felt pretty confident that any sort of operation had to be done covertly that he just basically has to disappear. Like if we brought him any place in St. Thomas, we risk the chance of someone seeing going into an office or something and know that he's burnt. And we knew that if we could cooperate him, he could devastate the drug community. And so the plan is Rick and Diaz, the case agent, they go over on I believe custom plane over to St. Thomas, and they prep to essentially kidnap him. And then myself, I'm on the Marine Go Fast boat in St. Croix, and while they're flying over, I'm on the way over, and I get a call from Joe, the case agent, and he was not a happy person on a boat. Like, he got seasick very easy, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
he must have looked at the seas on the flight over, and he calls me and he's like, "Hey, how bad is it out there?" And I didn't want him to cancel it because at this point I was already on my way, and I was like, "Oh, it's smooth. It's crystal clear. Everything's great, man." He goes, "You sure?" I go, "Yeah, it's beautiful. This is gonna work. This is gonna be perfect, right?" Meanwhile, we're just getting our asses handed to us in this boat, right? It is really rough. And so we get over to St. Thomas, and we're staging by a dock that's close to a hotel. And one of the St. Thomas local guys that are assigned to the task force, they put a call into the lead target, and they tell him one of his boats is broken free from a mooring, but they've secured it, but he needs to get down here because there's no fenders and the boat's going to get messed up if he doesn't get down there. Mm-hmm. So the lead target leaves his house, and Rick, I'll let you explain how you grabbed him.
Yeah, sure. So we were he had pretty thick forest down below where his house was. They're kind of like rainforesty kind of area. So he had to drive down this remote road to get to the main drag. And we were just everywhere hidden. There were some little side roads up in the woods. We were back up in the brush and whatever. But I remember they had me, I think I was like in an old Bronco, not those little mini Ford Bronco 2s, but it was like a full size old Bronco. And he came out of there and we just jammed him. And it was automatic weapons all around. We all had either M4s or sub guns. But we got him out of there, hooded him, got him in a van. I mean, this guy, I think he thought it was like a KGB kidnapping. It was all so fast. I would say from the time that we jammed him up till we had him in the back of that van, and I was sitting on top of him with my knees like on his shoulders, with face down, was a minute. Maybe from the time that we were out of there. That's how fast it happened. And this guy, I mean, he was really, really scared. And we don't say much to him. We just drive in silence in that van and down to the waterfront. Had to kind of go down a long, winding road down to this beach, like Chris said. It was a kind of like a cliffside resort type area with a little tiny lonely dock down below it. But so we get down there, and this guy, he was, I mean, for being a badass, he was scared. But we get him on the boat. We had our own life vest, but we didn't really think forward to getting a vest for him. But I don't know if you've ever seen those give a penny, take a penny vest, like for kids, like where if you go to like a public dock, they'll have like people donate them. They're like this little tiny ducky, or like maybe like a Polly Prissy Pants strawberry shortcake type situation. But we grabbed one of those. It was like this tiny, like it was ridiculous, like around his neck like this. So he had his life vest now. Put him in the back, and I told him. I think Chris got a picture of from behind or whatever when I did this. But I told the guy very matter-of-factly what I tell any really bad guy that we get on an aircraft or someplace where if they wanted to fight, they could compromise the safety of the crew. I told him, I said, on the boat, if you do anything to try to compromise the safety of the people driving this boat, I said, I'll shoot you where you sit, and we'll call it good. And I didn't tell him like dramatically. I told him like that, and I said, we can still talk when we're done with this trip. And whatever, but in good conscience, I have to tell you what's going to happen. If you do A, then B is that's what's going to occur. And this guy was suitably afraid, and he sat there, and that was the end of that. But so we're talking about the fellow who would get sick. If you're sitting in a harbor watching fireworks on a boat, he would get seasick, and whatever. I mean, I felt bad for this guy. I mean, he would get seasick at the drop of a hat. So we take off, and of course, it's calm where the boat is. For the people out there that are like boat snobs, it was a Midnight Express, really good go fast boat. I think we'd seized it, but it was one of those really fast go fast.
Yeah.
So we take off out of there, and it was nice for about 2 minutes. And then we get out there on the open ocean, and I guess probably I'm going to echo what Chris said. It just beat your balls off out there. It was, these boats are made for going through, boats are made for going through big seas. But I mean, we're trying to go to, as fast as we can, but we are just smashing. And there's nowhere to sit on that boat for anybody except for the boat captain and the navigator, center mass, where the console is. And then, of course, where our guy with the little rubber ducky on the back, he's sitting in the seat right back by. He has the best seat in the house, which is total bullcrap. He's got the seat that's probably the less rough ride back by the motors, right? But we are hanging off these big Nerf bars along the the fronts. Of course, we still have we have weapons slung. We're up here. We're running red running lights. It looks like something out of a movie, to keep your night vision good. And whatever. So red running lights only on the boat, roar of the ocean, roar of those motors on the back, and we are hitting big seas, and it's knocking us to the floor. I mean, we're getting knocked to the floor of the boat, having to get back up. I mean, it's really braining us. And we get about probably halfway across, and what I had, because we had left so quickly, I had my tactical gear, like my tactical vest, underneath my tactical life vest. So I have magazines and equipment on this, but also I still have my original raid gear underneath that, along with my high test OC spray, which is for shadowing. So we're about halfway across between St. Croix and St. Thomas, and we hit a particularly huge wave. It drives us all into the floor, and I come back up, and I'm hanging back on again, and I hear, even over the roar of everything, I hear this barely. I'm like, am I just? Oh, no. Yeah, am I just hearing things or whatever? And then I start to feel like, because I'm soaking wet from from all the waves
spray
and sea spray and whatever, I start feeling going down into my no parts, and I'm like, it broken the top off of my OC spray under my tactical life vest, and so now it's just pouring down into my crotch and down my leg. Geez. I mean, it is, and it was. I remember it wasn't DEA issued. It was a Pittsburgh SWAT friend of mine had probably violated a couple of U.S. postal rules and sent me like a couple of this high test SWAT they use that was like 50 gazillion Schofield units or whatever. But this stuff was bad news, Charlie, man. And so I'm burning. But here's the thing. I mean, you can't show that bad guy anything, right? Because what we're doing is incumbent on getting him to cooperate, and he's got to see nothing but total badasses, which we have at this point we had accomplished with honors. But the guy he's talking about that would get seasick at the drop of a hat right behind me, he's getting, unbeknownst to me until later on, he's getting what's getting away from the vest, a little bit of it, and he's getting it. I can hear him cough a couple of times. I'm like, he must be getting a little bit of it. We get back, and we finally talk after we get back into St. Croix. And this fella had actually, it made him, he was already queasy and whatever, made him so sick, he threw up. But he didn't want the bad guy to see him throwing up. This is dedication. Threw up into his own life vest. Like surreptitiously, so the bad guy wouldn't see any kind of weakness on his part. So that you got to give that guy full honors for
into his bulletproof vest.
Threw up underneath it into there, so the guy wouldn't see him throwing up. Yeah,
nasty.
And to give you an idea of how big these seas were, when we got back into St. Croix Harbor, the boat captain had done a really good job. This guy was a local fella from St. Croix, and was a boat guy. He tells us after we get into the dock, he lost steering. Like as soon as we started hitting the big seas, I forget how he described it, like maybe knocking bubbles maybe it made bubbles in the steering system, like in the hydraulics. He lost regular steering on the boat. He was steering with trim tabs, the little tabs on the back of the boat that help you make the boat go. Like if you have too much weight on one side, it brings you evened up. He drove that boat through those kind of seas halfway across that big expanse of water with the trim tab. That's how bad the seas were. But we get Fluffy's boy back to St. Croix, and of course he gave it up so sweet.
All right, and let's stop right there because we've been going well over an hour now. And if you want to find out how this story ends, well, you're going to have to come back tomorrow. So to Rikk Rambo, Chris Howell, thank you guys so much for coming back for episode 3. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming back and listening to us. And you want to come back tomorrow because this story's not over yet. Thanks for your support here on Game of Crimes. God bless. I'll see you tomorrow.